The NFL draft is just as much a spectacle as it is a necessary part of professional football. There are lights, there are millions of dollars to be made, and of course, there's always just a little bit of controversy. I mean, the 2020 draft raised the bar by doing something that had never even been attempted before. It was held virtually during a global pandemic. So that was in itself a very interesting experience.
He is an amazing story. So we'll see what happens here, and now we're...
So today, as we live through one of the least normal years ever, I want to highlight some of the most bizarre picks in draft history, with the added power of hindsight of course, because just like greatness, dumb moments need to last forever.
New York Jets first round selection, fullback, Roger Vick, Texas A&M.
But before we jump into the minds of some true draft geniuses, I'd like to thank Hawthorne for helping me to make this video happen. For those of you who haven't heard of them, Hawthorne is a premium tailored cologne brand, and they formulate products specifically to you based on a quick quiz to determine your preferences. I went through the process myself actually, and it legitimately could not be an easier deal. And then just like that, a couple days later, I had luxury quality products right at my door. So with Father's Day right around the corner, considering that getting gifts for dads is like the top 3 most difficult things to do on a yearly basis, there really isn't a better gift for your old man than something he's going to use every single day. Specifically, I can recommend their hair products since they are excellent, but my dad is bald, so if that's the case for you, maybe skip the hair care and check out what else they have on offer. Hawthorne is actually running a special promo right now for Father's Day specifically, so to take advantage, just go to the link in the description and get an offer that includes a $20 gift certificate and a greeting card to make your gift for your dad all the more special. So head on down to the link below to check that out, and once again, a huge thank you to Hawthorne.
With the 59th pick in the 2016 NFL Draft, the Tampa Bay Buccaneers select Roberto Aguayo, kicker, Florida State.
Plenty of NFL fans remember the league-wide laughingstock the Tampa Bay Bucks became in 2016 when they drafted a kicker with their second-round pick, the highest a kicker had been drafted in over a decade. It was meant to be a franchise-cementing selection that would secure that position for years on end, but it didn't exactly work out that way. Even though, as a fan of the Bucks, that pick made me want to fire Jason Light out of one of the cannons on their pirate ship, it doesn't even hold a candle to what the New Orleans Saints did in the 1979 draft. The Saints were picking 11th, and they had a variety of needs to address specifically on the defensive side of the ball. But even on offense, Hall of Fame talents like Kellen Winslow and Joe Montana were still on the board. But lo and behold, when the pick came in, the Saints would select Russell Erxleben, a kicker/punter hailing from the University of Texas, where he'd set an NCAA record with a 67-yard field goal, and not to mention, finished his career as the only player to ever be named a 3-time All-American at punter. Even with all of those accolades though, fans were still rightfully shocked by that pick. But despite the fact the team already had 2 rostered veterans at punter and place kicker, I suppose the Saints front office had hope that Erxleben could play both positions at an all-pro level for years to come. Even if things had worked out that way, it would have been questionable value. But of course, it did not. Erxleben played just 6 years in the NFL, and the majority of that was spent as a punter, with just 4 of 8 field goals made that he attempted in his career. Despite his crazy high draft stock, he was inconsistent and crumbled when the pressure was on, and by the time his career ended, he'd be considered the biggest draft bust in Saints history. That alone would be a sad end to the story, but a decade after Erxleben left the NFL, he'd get caught up in an FBI investigation that linked him to a Ponzi scheme that scammed tens of millions of dollars away from investors, sending him to prison for 7 years. Oh, and then once he was released from there, he would spend a few years as a free man before being caught in another investment fraud case that netted him an additional 7 years of jail time. So, if anything, I guess the Saints can take solace in the fact that they weren't the only ones that Erxleben conned. But still a terrible pick, though. NFL football has changed an insane amount over its history of 100 years and counting. It's been through wars that have changed the way we view the world, and technology that's changed the way we communicate with each other. But in a time where the draft lacked the instant communication of today's day and age, and the league lacked the big money that makes playing for it now one of the most lucrative gigs in the nation, it was actually a lot harder to secure who you'd actually be drafting on a yearly basis. There isn't a franchise who came to understand that fact better than Washington in 1946 when they drafted running back Cal Rossi 9th overall in the first round, impressed by his record 5.85 yards per carry at UCLA and beautiful smile. Here's the thing though, and I don't even want to know how this slipped through the cracks, but Rossi couldn't be drafted until the next year, considering he was only a junior at the time, and players were mandated to play 4 years before entering the NFL back then. So Washington had to sit on their hands and wait to create that super backfield of Cal Rossi and Sammy Baugh until the very next season, when they drafted Rossi with the 4th overall pick in the 1947 draft. The team was ready to set out on the path to greatness with their new franchise ball carrier. That is, until they found out that he was actually going to be joining the Navy and had zero intentions to play football, meaning that Washington had yet again struck out after doubling down on one single player in the first round. Rossi would follow through with his word, and he never played a down of pro football, and the team would go through a playoff drought until 1974, with their incredible mismanagement of first-round picks more than partially to blame. However, at the very least, it wouldn't be the worst blunder in team history. That would come later. Coincidentally, the ownership of Dan Snyder lines up pretty perfectly with our last story of the day, which is fresh out of the 1999 NFL Draft, one of the wildest and most action-packed first rounds in league history. It would be a quarterback bonanza in the early first, beginning with the reborn but still cursed Cleveland Browns drafting Tim Couch at number 1 overall. But for many fans and scouts alike, the best player and overall prize to be won for one lucky franchise was Ricky Williams, a running back out of Texas crowned the best college football player in the nation, and there was good reason for that. The Philadelphia Eagles held the number 2 pick, and fans patiently awaited the announcement of their selection, thinking it was going to be open and shut, chanting, "We want Ricky" loud enough for it to be heard from outside Madison Square Garden. But of course, you know Philly fans, they were going to be supportive of their team no matter what the front office's decision was.
With the second pick, the Philadelphia Eagles select Donovan McNabb, quarterback, Syracuse University.
Yeah. McNabb was actually booed so ferociously after being picked by the Eagles that his mother burst into tears over how her son was being reacted to. So it's safe to say the fan base wasn't too welcoming at the thought of passing over Williams. But ultimately, in a stroke of fortune that they weren't exactly deserving of, McNabb would become Philly's franchise quarterback for 11 seasons, leading the team to 5 NFC Championship games, a Super Bowl appearance, and 6 Pro Bowls of his own. And that's all great, but McNabb isn't the star of the show at this point. It was still Williams. Ricky had caught the eye of many teams in the league with his dominant college career, but there was no coach who fell in love with him harder than one Mike Ditka, head coach of the New Orleans Saints, who happened to be floundering to try and save his job following 2 straight 6-10 seasons. With a collegiate record 2,327 rushing yards and 30 total touchdowns in a Heisman-winning senior season, Ditka had seen all he needed to confirm that Williams was the player he needed to take the Saints to the Super Bowl. In fact, that was a direct quote of his, so he was going to stop at nothing to get him. In fact, Ditka was so determined to draft Williams that at the NFL owners meeting months prior, he publicly announced that he'd be willing to trade his entire draft to take him, something that had never happened before. That might not have been the best idea for leverage in negotiating, but leverage wasn't going to matter so long as Ricky ended up playing for the Saints. So now, cut back to pick number 3, the Bengals are on the clock. The general manager of the Saints calls up and offers 9 of their draft picks to swap their 12th pick for the Bengals selection. The Bengals decline and instead take quarterback Akili Smith. Reading that out now, that was probably a mistake on their part, but I digress. Pick number 4, the Indianapolis Colts. They select Edgerrin James, who was another running back taken over Williams, shocking the entire crowd and nation. So at this point, Ditka's trigger finger is getting insanely itchy. You gotta remember, he's seeing visions of sweetness reincarnated and another Lombardi trophy to his name. So the Saints call up the owner of pick 5, Washington. And they offer them everything.
New Orleans' first, third, fourth, fifth, sixth, and seventh round picks in this draft, and New Orleans' first and third round picks in next year's draft.
So Ditka was not joking. The Saints gave up the entirety of their 1999 draft, and to sweeten the pot a little, added in a first and third round pick from the next year's draft, all to take one single running back. Man, the NFL was a different time back then. So with that, it was done. Williams was a Saint, and within 24 hours, Mike Ditka was rocking a Hawaiian shirt and dreads to celebrate, ready to bring a new face to the Saints and bring a championship to New Orleans. Oh, and that's without even mentioning the ESPN The Magazine cover that declared the pair to be husband and wife. If there's one thing to be said for the entirety of the Ricky Williams ordeal, it's that confidence can be one hell of a drug, and that might have just managed to have an impact on what would follow. Despite promises of Super Bowl glory, a cocktail of injuries and pressure kneecapped Williams' rookie campaign, and led to the subsequent firing of Mike Ditka following a 3-13 record on the year. Williams wasn't a bust per se in his 3 years with the Saints, just judging by performance alone, but by the expectations of being the savior of the franchise and superstar prodigy from day one, it's safe to say that those benchmarks were not reached. But to be completely honest, how the hell could they have been? Mike Ditka really managed to get an entire organization to put faith in his judgment that the Saints were one Heisman winning back away from winning a championship, and considering that he'd done that before, the team wanted to believe in him, even if it resulted in flaming out just 16 games later. Ricky Williams bounced from the Saints to the Dolphins and saw varied success through his 11 seasons in the league, but would ultimately end his career with a solid 10,009 rushing yards, which is good for 31st all-time. Williams likely would have also finished with significantly more statistically if it hadn't been for his off-field struggles with violating the league's substance abuse policy, costing him multiple games and seasons. Overall, a solid career with a very strange beginning and no shortage of speed bumps along the way. So I suppose the overarching moral of the story here, if there is one, is don't do drugs, kids. Not because you might get suspended, but because otherwise you might just end up trading the entirety of your draft to select a running back 5th overall. Thank you for watching.